Welcome to the ultimate countdown of the top 10 political legends who changed the world. These are leaders whose courage, vision, and strength reshaped nations and inspired millions. Whether you agree with their politics or not, their impact is undeniable. Let's dive into their incredible stories. 10. Fidel Castro, the revolutionary who defied superpowers. They called him a dictator. Others called him a hero. He survived over 600 assassination attempts, stared down U.S. presidents, and led a tiny island to global significance. This is the story of Fidel Castro, the man who challenged empires and changed history. Fidel Castro was born in 1926 in Cuba to a wealthy sugar plantation owner. He had access to education, attending law school at the University of Havana, where he became politically active and deeply influenced by Marxist ideas. At the time, Cuba was under the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, a regime backed by foreign interests, especially the U.S. economy. Castro believed that Cuba's wealth and freedom were stolen by elites and foreign powers. In 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed, and he was imprisoned. But in court, he delivered his famous line, "History will absolve me." After being released, he regrouped with rebels like Che Guevara and launched a guerrilla war from the mountains. The odds were against him, but in 1959, after years of struggle, Castro's forces overthrew Batista. He became Prime Minister of Cuba, later President, and the island was never the same. Castro nationalized industries, redistributed land, and aligned himself with the Soviet Union, directly challenging U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This move triggered decades of conflict: the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a failed U.S. attempt to topple him, only made Castro more defiant. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. For decades, Cuba endured economic embargoes, isolation, and political pressure. But Castro remained in power, fiery in speeches, strict in rule, and unyielding in ideology. Supporters hailed him for building a universal healthcare and education system, drastically reducing illiteracy and improving life expectancy. Critics condemned him for oppressing dissent, restricting freedom of speech, and running a one-party state. He outlasted 10 U.S. presidents, survived over 600 assassination attempts, and remained a towering global figure until he stepped down in 2008 due to health reasons. He died in 2016, at the age of 90, still admired by some, hated by others, but respected for his impact. Fidel Castro ranked in 10 because he led one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century. He symbolized anti-imperialism and inspired global resistance movements. He made Cuba globally relevant in politics, health, and ideology. His legacy is complex, admired by many in the global South, criticized in the West, but undeniably legendary. 9. Che Guevara, the revolutionary who became a global icon. With a beret, a beard, and a bulletproof belief in freedom, he left behind wealth, comfort, and even borders to fight for the oppressed. Whether you call him a hero or a radical, Che Guevara's legacy refuses to die. Born in 1928 in Rosario, Argentina, Ernesto Che Guevara grew up in a middle-class family. Deeply educated and well-read in philosophy, politics, and medicine, but it was a motorcycle journey across Latin America in his 20s that opened his eyes. He witnessed brutal poverty, inequality, and imperial exploitation, and it changed him forever. He believed that real change wouldn't come through politics alone, but through armed revolution. In the mid-1950s, Che Guevara met Fidel Castro in Mexico. The two men, driven by a common dream of liberating Cuba from US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista, joined forces. Che Guevara wasn't just a doctor or thinker. He became one of the key guerrilla commanders in the Cuban Revolution. And in 1959, they succeeded. Batista fled, and Castro took power, with Che Guevara at his side. But Che Guevara didn't stop there. He held top posts in Cuba, as Minister of Industry and President of the National Bank, but bureaucracy bored him. He wanted global revolution in the 1960s. He vanished from public view, reappearing in Congo and later in Bolivia, where he tried to spark uprisings among the poor. In 1967, he was captured by CIA-backed Bolivian forces and executed. At just 39 years old, but death only magnified his legend. His face, that iconic black and white photo, became a global symbol of rebellion, justice, and anti-imperialism. His writings, especially the Motorcycle Diaries and Guerrilla Warfare, continue to inspire millions. Che Guevara is ranked in 9 because Che Guevara wasn't a politician in the traditional sense, but a political symbol of freedom and revolution. His actions shaped the future of Cuba, influenced movements across Africa, Latin America, and beyond, and challenged the global balance of power. He died young, but left behind a timeless legacy of fighting for the voiceless, regardless of national borders. 8. Vladimir Lenin, the architect of revolution. He was exiled, hunted, and hated by monarchs and capitalists alike. But in the shadows of Tsarist Russia, he plotted a revolution that would shake the entire world. With a pen, a vision, and an iron will, Vladimir Lenin didn't just overthrow an empire, he built a new one from its ashes. Was he a hero of the people or the architect of decades of pain? Before you decide, hear the story of the man who lit the match that burned through history. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known to the world as Lenin, was not born into poverty, but into ideas. Born in 1870 in Simbirsk, Russia, his life changed forever at the age of 17 when his older brother, Alexander, was executed for attempting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. That single act of rebellion and its consequences set Lenin on a path of radicalism and unrelenting revolution. While others argued for gradual reform, Lenin believed in total transformation. He studied law, but the courtroom could never contain his anger at injustice. He read Marx, wrote pamphlets, and by his early 20s was already being watched and then arrested by Russian authorities. Exiled to Siberia and later escaping to Europe, he would spend nearly 2 decades in the shadows, organizing, writing, and rallying revolutionaries from Geneva to London. But the empire he despised was crumbling. By 1917, Russia was battered by World War I, and the people were starving and angry. In the February Revolution, the Tsar was finally overthrown. But Lenin wasn't satisfied. He didn't want a half-revolution, he wanted it all. That October, he and his Bolshevik party stormed the Winter Palace and seized power in what became known as the October Revolution. The world gasped. This wasn't just a coup. This was the birth of the world's first communist state. Lenin was a leader like no other, brilliant, uncompromising, and deeply ideological. He withdrew Russia from the First World War, redistributed land to peasants, and nationalized major industries. But his revolution was not bloodless. Civil war raged between Reds and Whites. Thousands died, dissent was crushed, freedom of the press vanished, and secret police the Cheka were given terrifying power. Yet to millions, Lenin was a savior. He promised bread, land, and peace, and for many, he delivered just that. He believed the ends justified the means, that to build a worker's paradise, you had to tear down the old world by force. In 1922, Lenin suffered a massive stroke. His health declined rapidly, and though he lived until 1924, his influence waned. He tried to warn against Stalin's rise, but it was too late. The revolution had outgrown him. When he died, his body was embalmed and placed in a glass tomb in Moscow. A symbol of the man who had turned ideas into action and action into empire. Today, Vladimir Lenin remains a deeply polarizing figure. In some corners of the world, he's still celebrated as the liberator of the working class. In others, he's blamed for opening the door to totalitarianism, oppression, and decades of Cold War conflict. But one thing is undeniable: Lenin didn't just change Russia, he changed the entire world. And his revolution echoes through every society that ever dared to imagine something different. 7. Winston Churchill, the voice that stopped Hitler. There was a time when the world stood on the edge of darkness, bombs falling from the sky, cities burning, Hitler's army advancing. And just one man stood between victory and defeat, not with muscle, but with words. His speeches were like fire. His courage was contagious. This is Winston Churchill, the man who refused to surrender. Winston Churchill was born on November 30, 1874, in Oxfordshire, England, into an aristocratic family. Though he struggled in school, he was bold, restless, and fiercely determined. A soldier, war correspondent, and later, A rising political star, Churchill lived for action. But it wasn't until World War II that his true legend was born. In 1940, Britain was in crisis. Nazi Germany had conquered much of Europe. France had fallen. Hitler's next target, Britain. The Prime Minister resigned, and in their darkest hour, the nation turned to Churchill. He was 65 years old, overweight, grumpy. Many doubted him. But when he took the microphone and said, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender," a frightened nation stood up straight. His voice became Britain's shield. Churchill refused to negotiate with Hitler. He rallied allies. He strengthened the Royal Air Force, and during the Blitz, when German bombs fell nightly over London, Churchill walked through the ruins with his people. He became a symbol of defiance, but Churchill was more than just war speeches. He built international coalitions, working closely with Roosevelt and Stalin. He helped steer the Allies to victory. In 1945, Germany surrendered. The war was won. But Churchill's own political party lost the election just weeks later. Still, he didn't quit. He returned as Prime Minister in 1951 and remained a towering global figure until his retirement in 1955. In his final years, he wrote, painted, and received the Nobel Prize in Literature. He died in 1965 at the age of 90. The world mourned. Even his enemies respected him. To each, there comes in their lifetime a special moment, Churchill once said, when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing. He took that chance and changed the course of history. 6. Barack Obama, the hope that echoed worldwide. He wasn't just a politician, he was a symbol. A child of a Kenyan man and a white American woman, raised by his grandparents, who went on to sit in the most powerful office on earth. This is not just a story about power. It's about possibility. This is the story of Barack Obama. Barack Hussein Obama was born in 1961 in Hawaii, far from the political centers of power. His father was from Kenya, his mother from Kansas. They separated when he was young, and Obama was raised mostly by his grandparents. From a young age, Obama was curious, thoughtful, a dreamer shaped by both race and rejection, by a deep search for identity. After graduating from Columbia University, he worked as a community organizer in Chicago, walking streets plagued by poverty and crime. There, he didn't lead with slogans, he listened. He helped, he learned what real change meant. He later graduated from Harvard Law School, becoming the first black president of the Harvard Law Review, a sign of the history he was about to make. In 2004, at the Democratic National Convention, he gave a speech that shook America. With words like poetry, he declared, "There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America." For years later, he became the first black president of the United States. The world stood still. Crowds filled the streets, tears fell. From South Africa to Sweden, millions celebrated, not just an election, but a moment of history. Obama entered office in 2009, during the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Banks were failing, homes were being lost, hope was thin. But with calm intellect and global diplomacy, he steered America away from collapse. He passed the Affordable Care Act, giving millions of Americans access to health care, a move praised by some, attacked by others, but undeniably transformative. He ordered the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, ending a decade-long manhunt. He reopened diplomatic ties with Cuba, signed the Paris Climate Agreement, and elevated America's global image through diplomacy, not domination. Obama was not without critics. Some said he spoke more than he acted, that he was too measured, that he compromised too much. But through it all, his legacy remained rooted in something deeper than politics, hope. In his own words, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." When he left office in 2017, he did so peacefully, reminding the world what democratic transition truly looks like. He ranked in 6 because he broke racial and historical barriers on a global scale. He transformed America's role in the world through diplomacy. He gave a new generation, globally, permission to believe in change. His presidency became a symbol of global unity and the power of words. 5. Angela Merkel, the reluctant leader who ruled Europe. She never sought fame, never raised her voice, but became one of the most powerful women in history. From a divided Germany to the heart of the European Union, this is the story of a scientist-turned-stateswoman. This is Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel was born in 1954 in Hamburg, West Germany, but her family soon moved to East Germany, the communist side of the Berlin Wall. Living under a dictatorship, Merkel excelled in science, eventually earning a Ph.D. in quantum chemistry. She was quiet, precise, analytical. No one predicted she would one day lead a nation. But when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, everything changed. Merkel, already active in local reform movements, joined the new democratic movement sweeping the country. Her intelligence and calm demeanor stood out, and soon she caught the attention of then-Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who called her Das Mädchen, the girl. By 2005, she became Germany's first female chancellor, and for the next 16 years, she would become the undisputed leader of Europe. Her style was the opposite of most world leaders. She didn't dominate with charisma or fiery speeches. She ruled with reason, stability, and quiet strength. Merkel led Germany through multiple crises: the 2008 global financial meltdown, the Eurozone debt crisis, the 2015 refugee crisis. When she opened Germany's doors to over 1 million people, a decision praised by some and fiercely criticized by others. And the COVID-19 pandemic, where her scientific background helped guide Germany more calmly than most. While others played politics, Merkel earned trust. She became a symbol of stability in chaos and was widely regarded as the real leader of the free world. After Donald Trump's election, her leadership wasn't about personal glory. She didn't tweet, she didn't boast, she wore the same suits. She carried the same handbag for 16 years. Yet, under her leadership, Germany became Europe's economic powerhouse, a global diplomatic bridge, and a model of democratic resilience. In 2021, she stepped down voluntarily, with no scandals, no drama. Just dignity. "I did my job as best I could," she simply said. She ranked in 5 because she led Europe's largest economy through the 21st century's toughest crises. She broke gender and political expectations with grace. She prioritized facts over fear and unity over ego. Her legacy is not flashy, it's foundational. For Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president who beat crisis twice. Imagine leading a country when the economy has collapsed. Millions are homeless, then a world war erupts. To historic disasters, one man at the center. But he didn't just survive, he inspired a nation to believe again. This is the story of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president who never stood up, but always stood tall. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, known as FDR, was born on January 30, 1882, into a wealthy New York family. But privilege didn't protect him from pain. At 39, he was struck by polio, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He couldn't walk unaided for the rest of his life. But instead of retreating, Roosevelt rose. In 1932, with the Great Depression at its worst, Roosevelt ran for president. 1 in 4 Americans was jobless, banks were failing, people were starving. Then came FDR's voice on the radio, calm, confident, reassuring. In his inaugural speech, he famously said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." He launched the New Deal, massive reforms to rebuild the economy, jobs programs, banking reforms, Social Security. Slowly, hope returned. He gave fireside chats on the radio, speaking directly to citizens like a neighbor. Then, in 1941, everything changed again. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered World War II. Now Roosevelt had to lead not just recovery, but war. He united the country, ramped up industry, and forged powerful alliances with Churchill and Stalin. Under FDR, the US became the arsenal of democracy, supplying the Allies with weapons, strategy, and courage. Though he never walked on a battlefield, his leadership shifted the course of global history. He was elected 4 times, the only US president to do so. But in 1945, just months before the war ended, Roosevelt died from a stroke at age 63. America wept. Yet his legacy lived on: Social Security, economic reform, global leadership, and the reminder that even in a wheelchair, a leader can carry the weight of the world. "When you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on," he once said. FDR didn't just hang on, he pulled a nation through. 3. Abraham Lincoln, the president who freed a nation. He was born in a log cabin with nothing. No privilege, no power, just a fierce belief in freedom. He led a nation through its bloodiest war, changed history with a single proclamation, and paid the ultimate price. This is not just a president, this is a symbol of courage and justice. This is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809 in rural Kentucky, into deep poverty. He had less than a year of formal schooling, but his hunger for knowledge was unstoppable. He taught himself law, reading by firelight at night, and eventually became a lawyer, congressman, and later, one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. In 1860, at a time when America was bitterly divided over slavery, Lincoln was elected as the 16th President of the United States. His election sparked outrage in the southern states, who feared he would end slavery, and within months, the Civil War had begun. Lincoln's leadership was tested like no president before him. The nation was tearing itself apart, brother against brother, state against state. But Lincoln held firm. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in Confederate territory free. It was a bold and moral act, one that transformed the war into a fight for human liberation. He spoke not with ego, but with empathy. His words, like the Gettysburg Address, were short, but immortal. "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Lincoln's vision was clear: unity, equality, and freedom. By 1865, the Union had won. Slavery was on the path to abolition. But just days after victory, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in Ford's Theater, becoming the first U.S. president to be killed in office. He died at 56 years old, but his legacy would live on for centuries. Lincoln is remembered not for being perfect, but for being principled, a man who put country before politics and justice before popularity. Why Abraham Lincoln is ranked 3? Because he preserved the United States during its most dangerous crisis. He freed millions from slavery, altering the course of human rights. His wisdom, humility, and strength still inspire leaders worldwide. He paid the ultimate price for unity and equality with his life. He didn't just lead, he changed what leadership means. 2. Mahatma Gandhi, the man who fought an empire without a gun. What if I told you one man brought the British Empire to its knees? Wearing nothing but simple cloth and holding no weapon at all. No bullets, no armies, just truth, just resistance. He didn't yell, he didn't run, but the world stopped to listen. This is the story of a peaceful warrior, Mahatma Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, in Porbandar, India. No one knew then that this skinny, soft-spoken boy would one day lead millions, not with fear, but with conviction. He went to law school in London and worked in South Africa, where he first experienced deep racism. One night, thrown off a train for refusing to leave the whites-only compartment, he decided enough was enough. That night, a fire was lit, not just for his own dignity, but for every oppressed soul. Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and what he saw devastated him: his homeland crippled by British colonial rule, his people taxed, beaten, silenced. But he didn't fight back with violence, he created a new weapon: nonviolent resistance, or satyagraha. Gandhi led strikes, boycotts, and mass marches. When the British imposed unfair salt taxes, Gandhi walked 140 miles to the sea to make his own salt, a simple act that shook the empire. Thousands joined, and though many were beaten and jailed, they didn't retaliate. The world took notice. Time magazine named him Man of the Year in 1930. To millions, he became Bapu, father of the nation. But freedom wasn't easy. Gandhi was arrested many times. He fasted in protest. He pleaded for peace even as violence erupted between Hindus and Muslims. His dream was a united India, free from both colonial rule and internal hate. Finally, in 1947, India gained its independence, but that victory came with pain. The partition of India and Pakistan led to chaos and bloodshed. Gandhi's heart broke. He fasted again, this time to stop his own people from killing each other. Then, on January 30th, 1948, while walking to evening prayers, Gandhi was shot by a radical who disagreed with his vision of peace. He died at age 78, whispering, "Hey Ram, oh God," but his life didn't end that day. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, they all followed Gandhi's path. His legacy became global. "Be the change you wish to see in the world," he said. And he was. Mahatma Gandhi proved you don't need a sword to make a revolution. You just need courage and an unshakable belief in truth. He ranked in two because he led the world's largest nonviolent resistance, defeating one of the most powerful empires in history. Gandhi inspired civil rights movements worldwide, proving that truth and peace can be stronger than guns. 1. Nelson Mandela, the man who turned prison into power. Imagine being locked in a prison cell for 27 years, just for standing up for what's right. No family, no freedom, and still refusing to give up hope. That man didn't just survive, he came out stronger. And when he walked out of those prison gates, he walked straight into history. This is not just a political legend, this is Nelson Mandela, the man who turned chains into change. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a rural village called Mvezo in South Africa. From the very beginning, Mandela carried within him a quiet fire. Growing up under apartheid, a brutal system that legally separated black South Africans from whites, he saw his people treated as second-class citizens in their own land. But Mandela chose not to remain silent. He became a lawyer, a freedom fighter, and a voice for the voiceless. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress ANC, and by the 1950s, he was leading resistance movements against racial segregation. Peaceful protests turned into defiant campaigns. The South African government labeled him a threat, a dangerous radical. In 1962, Mandela was arrested. He was sentenced to life in prison. For the next 27 years, he was locked away, mostly on Robben Island, breaking rocks under the sun, isolated from the world, but never broken in spirit. While the regime tried to erase his voice, Mandela's name became a symbol. Across continents, students marched, artists sang, and leaders demanded his release. Then, in 1990, the impossible happened. Nelson Mandela walked free, but he didn't return with bitterness. Instead of revenge, he offered reconciliation. Instead of war, he sought peace. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. Millions stood in line for hours to vote, and they elected Nelson Mandela as the country's first black president. But his true power was not just political. It was moral. He forgave those who had jailed him. He called for unity in a nation torn by hate. Mandela served only one term, but his legacy will last for centuries. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 95, but his story lives in every voice that rises against injustice, in every soul that chooses dignity over division. "I have walked that long road to freedom," Mandela once said. "I have taken a moment here to rest. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and that's what makes him a legend." Mandela was ranked number 1 because he turned 27 years in prison into a peaceful revolution. He united a divided nation without revenge. Mandela's leadership wasn't just national, it became global, inspiring people from Africa to America. He stands as a symbol of forgiveness, resilience, and justice.
We ranked these legends by their global impact, leadership during crisis, and lasting legacy. Mandela leads for his peaceful revolution and unity. Gandhi for his unmatched non-violence. Churchill for his defiant courage in war. But every figure here made history that still shapes us today. Do you agree with this list? Or do you think someone else belongs in the top 10? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this ranking, subscribe to the channel to never miss a legendary story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time with another incredible legend.